My ISU presentation is going to be comparing King Lear and Flowers for Algernon. Flowers for Algernon is a book written by Daniel Keyes, and it is about a man named Charlie Gordon who is born, as the book calls him, a retard. He has the mental capabilities of a child, and he undergoes a surgery that turns him into a genius. And my thesis is that King Lear by Shakespeare and Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes both contain biblical allegories throughout their entirety. There is the Christian concept of sin, punishment, and redemption, Adam and Eve, and the idea of a God. So in King Lear, we can see that sin is everywhere. From the moment Shakespeare introduces Goneril, Regan, and Edmund into the play, they have been symbolized as demons. Goneril and Regan took away everything their father had, drove him out of his home, and left him to die in the wilderness. Edmund was willing to do the same, as he planned to kill his father and brother so that he could inherit Gloucester. They are shown to be cold, treacherous, and selfish. Lear himself is an arrogant and self-centered king. He is willing to listen and reward the deadly lies and flattery from Goneril and Regan, but punishes the good-willed criticism of Kent and Cordelia. There is only one sin in Flowers for Algernon, and that is knowledge. Because God made everyone how they are for a reason, so by undergoing the operation and wanting to become smarter, Charlie had sinned. And punishment in the Bible is what comes after the sin. So in King Lear, it comes back to haunt them. Everyone who sinned gets punished. Regan is poisoned to death by Goneril. Goneril commits suicide, and Edmund dies by his brother's hand, as they have not repented and deserve their punishment. Lear gets kicked out into the storm as an outcast, and he goes mad, while Gloucester loses his sight, not because they have directly sinned, but rather as errors committed by them. In Flowers for Algernon, Charlie, after undergoing the operation, goes from complete moron to intellectual genius in a short span of time. By becoming smarter, he's going against nature and thus sins. As punishment for his sins, Charlie becomes an outcast to society, smarter than everyone, rejected by people who once welcomed him. He eventually is thrown out of the bakery, which was his home for more than 17 years. Redemption is the only salvation of God's wrath. Any man can be rescued through the repentance of their sins. Lear and Gloucester were able to achieve redemption only after committing sins and enduring the punishment that followed. Lear learns more about himself by suffering, and by suffering he learns empathy for his fellow men and human suffering. Lear recognizes Cordelia only after his suffering, and even attempts to kneel down before her. To kneel down symbolizes a true kind of enlightenment, indicating how Lear is repenting from the very bottom of his heart. Gloucester also faces a similar situation as Lear. He too drove his good child into exile and rewarded the evil one. Lear gains spiritual wisdom when he goes mad, whereas Gloucester gains spiritual vision when he gets physically blinded. Gloucester achieves his repentance once he learns Edmund betrayed him. He does not accuse Edmund of treachery, but rather begs forgiveness for the wronged Edgar. Redemption did not come by choice for Charlie in Flowers for Algernon. Charlie's sin was knowledge, the want of it, and undergoing the surgery to get it. In exchange for knowledge, he lost everything dear to him, his friends, his home, and his emotions. The surgery turns out to be temporary, so Charlie reverts back to his old self and achieves redemption by forgetting about the life he had and embracing what he was born with, and continued to live with what God had given him. After reverting back to a moron, he regained his former life, including his friends and home. The story, myth, tale, biblical story of Adam and Eve, however you perceive it to be, is a relevant theme to both King Lear and Flowers for Algernon. King Lear only had one reference similar to Adam and Eve. When the gentleman speaks to Cordelia, who redeems nature from the general curse which Twain had brought her to, it is similar to the concept of Christ's redemption of humankind from the sin of Adam and Eve and the curse that their disobedience to God brought upon all human beings. Much like Adam and Eve being evicted from the garden, Lear was evicted into the storm. In Flowers for Algernon, the concept of Adam and Eve is much more relevant. Charlie is Adam and Eve before biting into the fruit of knowledge. They were happy. Similarly, Charlie was happier before the surgery. God made Adam and Eve leave the Garden of Eden after eating the fruit, much like how Charlie lost his job and home at the bakery. The professor and the doctor who discovered the way and operation to pretty much create Charlie represent God and Satan in the way they created Charlie after the operation and corrupted him with the knowledge of the world, as Adam and Eve were corrupted by the serpent. After eating the fruit, Adam and Eve saw the evil and corruption in the world, as well as the embarrassment at their nudity. After the operation, Charlie too saw the evil and corruption in the world, and became embarrassed when he realized how stupid he was before the operation. The most relevant concept in both works is the idea of God. In King Lear, the play was written and staged within the 1600s, which is the religious time period. The idea of God and the king was closely related. The king was God's representative on earth and such serves as a role model for the behavior of the kingdom's servants. Edgar defeats Edmund symbolizes righteousness triumphing over corruption, ensuring God's blessing, signaling his ability to assume the role of king. Shakespeare constantly reminds the audience that there are supernatural higher powers with keywords placed every so often, including Apollo, Juno, heavens, and God. And then there's the concept in Flowers of Algernon, but it's slightly different because it's humans which are trying to play God, which can kind of be the same as King Lear, as a king has the right to decide who lives and who dies, and control people pretty much the same way as a god would. So technically a king is also playing God, but in Flowers of Algernon, Charlie's personal journals, like the entirety of a book, spans over a period of 9 months, which symbolize the human gestation period, usually resulting in the birth of a newly born individual, which would be Charlie being reborn into the world as a normal person. Right after the operation, a nurse tells Charlie that he was brave for undergoing the operation, but that maybe Professor Niemer and Dr. Strauss was tampering with things they had no right to tamper with. Charlie was used as a guinea pig and turned into a genius. His entire life, he was told that God might be able to fix him. His mother constantly reminded him to tell him to pray to God. A doctor they took him to told him, with the Lord's help, maybe he could make Charlie like the other children. And then eventually, at a association presentation, Professor Niemer says, where they claim the creation of Charlie and played God, where they say, we have taken one of nature's mistakes and by our new techniques have created a superior human being. In both of these plays, King Lear and Charlie were both driven out of something after they sinned. Similarly to how Jesus was exiled everywhere he went by the non-believers. And this is why, in conclusion, both King Lear and Flowers for Algernon, despite being different genres, one being a play and one being a book, and written during different periods of time, and their settings are different, as Lear's in the medieval and Flowers for Algernon is far more into the future. They share hidden but embedded biblical allegories within, from the Christian concept of sin, punishment, and redemption to the concept of a God.